At 37 years old, Tom Cruise gave us Magnolia. He took his million-watt movie star charisma, weaponized it into toxic armor, and completely shattered it on screen. At 37, Glen Powell just gave us How to Make a Killing, and he's still relying on the exact same frat-boy smirk to convince us he's a psychopath. It's time to stop pretending these two are playing the same sport.
Respect the cock. $69, dudes!
For the last few years, the Hollywood PR machine has been working overtime, desperately trying to sell us a very specific narrative. They want us to believe, with every fibre of our being, that Glen Powell is the next Tom Cruise. And look, I get it. The industry is absolutely starved for a traditional, handsome leading man who isn't contractually obliged to wear a Marvel cape. They found a guy with a $1 million smile, retro swagger, and the ability to look extremely good in a pair of aviators or shorts. But as someone who actually grew up watching the evolution of cinema in the 80s and 90s, I have to hold the industry to a higher standard than this. Because if you look closely at Glen Powell's career, and especially if you look at his latest swing, How to Make a Killing, the truth becomes glaringly obvious. Glen Powell is not the next Tom Cruise. He's a deeply cynical, B-tier character actor who got strapped to a PR rocket, and Hollywood is terrified of letting him be anything else. So let's talk about How to Make a Killing. I saw it this weekend. On paper, it should be a cinematic home run, A24 style pitch black eat the rich comedy. Powell plays Beckett Redfellow, a supposedly down on his luck blue-collar retail worker from New Jersey who discovers he's been disowned from a massive family fortune. He decides to methodically murder his way up the eccentric family tree to secure a $28 billion inheritance. It's a solid premise, and it requires a leading man to be charming enough to make us root for him, but deeply terrifyingly unhinged enough to pull off the premise of being a serial killer in a comedy. And it fails. It fails specifically because of the limitations of its leading man. The first glaring issue is something you could term the Hollywood poverty body. The movie wants us to believe Beckett is a bitter, demoted retail worker scraping by in New Jersey. But Powell, he strolls through the entire film with that unshakable suavity, perfectly manicured hair, and brilliantly white teeth of a guy who already belongs in the 1%. We saw this exact same studio cowardice last year in The Running Man. Powell was supposedly playing a desperate father living in a grim dystopian nightmare who can't even afford basic medication for his kid. But the moment the towel drops in that movie, he looks like he's backed by a personal chef, a dedicated macro nutritionist, and 3 hours a day of high-intensity interval training.
We're good, baby.
The industry desperately wants the gritty underdog narrative for the prestige, but they refuse to let go of the Top Gun beach body. They want to have their cake and eat it too. But the real smoking gun in How to Make a Killing is the violence. Rather, the complete lack of violence. It's a dark comedy about a guy murdering his family, and it demands the protagonist gets his hands dirty, but the director, John Patton Ford, keeps the kills remote, sanitized, or completely off screen. Powell never kills anyone up close and personal. The movie's biggest trick is trying to make you root for Powell, only to pull the rug out and reveal, aha, he was a psycho all along, I guess. But when the penny finally drops, he doesn't come across as a monster. There's no chilling void behind his eyes. He just gives us the exact same frat boy smirk he's been coasting on since the opening credits, nay, the beginning of his career. Whew. It all feels so incredibly hollow. He's playing a Disney-fied Patrick Bateman. And this brings us right back to the Tom Cruise comparison. When you hold this modern, sanitized thriller up to the stand of an actual cinematic titan, the cracks shatter the whole facade. Hollywood has forgotten that to make a truly great dark comedy, your lead actually has to be willing to go into the dark. Think about Tom Cruise. He built an empire on playing the hyper-competent golden boy. But when Cruise pivots to villain or absolute dirtbag, he does it at a level Powell can't even comprehend. Think about Vincent in Collateral or Frank Mackey in Magnolia. Cruise isn't just winking at the camera, he's a dead-eyed shark. There is genuine, chilling malice underneath that movie star smile. He brings the exact same obsessive, terrifying 110% commitment to being a scumbag as he does to saving the world. If this was peak Collateral era Tom Cruise making How to Make a Killing, He would be hunting down a family tree of spoiled billionaires, not just coasting on a smirk. You would believe it down to your bones that he was a calculating, unhinged psychopath who felt entirely, terrifyingly justified in taking what was his. The comedy would come from the sheer psychotic intensity of his focus clashing with these ridiculous rich people. It would be an absolute pitch black, box office gold. But Powell doesn't have that intensity. His ceiling is completely different. He is solid. He's phenomenal when the assignment is charismatic arrogance. He was undeniable in Top Gun Maverick because the character required that smirk and that douchery.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your savior speaking.
Twisters worked because he wasn't carrying the entire emotional weight of the film. He was playing a bombastic YouTube cowboy. Look, the PR machine has taken a guy who spent a decade wading through absolute cinematic shite. Spy Kids 3D Game Over, Expendables 3, rom-coms, and they scrubbed it from the collective memory to artificially crown him the king. Before Cruise ever hung off the side of an airplane, he sought out absolute titans of cinema to build his credibility. Scorsese, Levinson, Stone, Reiner. He built an ironclad reputation as a heavyweight dramatic actor first. The action hero pivot was just Act 2. And that gives us the ultimate reality check. Glen Powell is 37 years old. At 37, Tom Cruise made Magnolia. He took his million-watt charisma and weaponized it into toxic armor and shattered it on screen. Glen Powell being touted as the next Tom Cruise? At 37, Tom Cruise was already peaked at 37. He'd done A Few Good Men. He was born on the 4th of July. He showed us the money. He counted the matchsticks. He flew F-18s. He hustled at pool. He danced in his underwear. At 37, Glen Powell is still just smirking, hoping we don't notice the Emperor is missing his dramatic clothes.
Still here, you shit-eaters.
But there's nothing wrong with being a really fun, solid popcorn movie star. But if you're going to step into the ring and try to execute a prestige dark comedy, you have to bring more than just good lighting and a jawline. You actually have to act.
Whew.
Would you like to know more?